a very good friend of mine, Jeff Sakwa, met Rick Wershey at somewhere. I don't even know where it was, but Jeff is one of those people that he does not. He exaggerates about probably his sex life, but he never exaggerates about other stuff. He's very honest. He tells me the truth on things. He says that this man is the most fascinating person that he has ever come into contact with. Many people know him, or everybody pretty much knows him as White Boy Rick. Which, by the way, do you have that on like a vanity plate on your license plate? You earned White Boy Rick to be able to be called that for the rest of your life, or do you even like being called that?
Usually, it's people that don't know me that call me that.
Okay,
I'm
going to sit down.
Pretty much just call me Rick.
Rick.
Are you trying to get away from that?
Absolutely
You just
not.
wanna-
I'm going to use it now.
Oh, you are.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't know if you didn't want that to be like your legacy, how people know you. You just want to be Rick.
I'm actually going to tell you guys something I'm not supposed to, but
Okay.
I have a brand called The Eighth coming out, and it's a cannabis line.
Uh-huh.
And the Eighth is a play on your Eighth Amendment, which is the violation in the ban on cruel and unusual punishment.
Wow, which
I
is
like that.
what you dealt with.
Absolutely.
So to give our listeners,
And I have to say something, not
Yes.
to interrupt you. I never watched the movie, so
well, I'm going to tell you this.
I didn't think it was the best
You're
either.
pretty.
From what I heard,
you're
I
prettier
didn't-
than Matthew McConaughey. I just want you to know that.
I didn't like the way that my father was depicted. So pretty much everything that you've read or heard about my dad is 100% lie.
Well,
Okay.
let's get the story
Let's do it.
from the horse's mouth.
So it all started with your dad, right? It was during times when you were how old years when everything was going on? Probably
14.
So 14 years old. Tell us about your dad. Give us a depiction of what you know of your dad.
Listen, my dad, he wasn't the best dad. My dad raised us. Me and my sister lived with our dad. Our grandparents lived across the street. So, my dad was a single dad. He was, trying to make a living. We lived in the east side of Detroit, which wasn't the best place at the time, to raise two kids. And my sister ended up becoming addicted to drugs. And that was how the whole FBI thing started. Anything that my dad got in trouble, and that's how it started, that's all BS.
So was your dad was he supporting you guys through drugs or how?
No, absolutely not. My dad never sold a drug in his life, never did a drug.
What'd your dad do for a living? What was his job?
Early on, he did sound and lighting. Like, I don't know if you remember. You remember Taboo or Lenote or any of those places?
I vaguely, yes.
That's how I know, like, Bella Piatti, Nino in Birmingham, one of the best restaurants in Birmingham.
Yeah.
Nino's kind of like a father to me, and I've known Nino. My dad did his first disco.
Wow. So I actually did all the lighting and stuff like that,
Yeah.
which lighting is so important for everything. But back then it was it, right? Yeah. If you could have the best lighting, for an establishment.
Actually, Jeff knew my dad's partner back then, Joe Royceman.
Okay.
And they had a good thing going, and I got to see a lot of things and do a lot of things because of that.
So how did your dad become an informant for a law enforcement? Was it because of all the people he knew on the east side?
My dad was
Is
never
that
an
true?
Oh, he
informant.
wasn't?
That's total bullshit.
Oh.
So the movie depicted it.
Huh.
It's false. Listen, one of my best friends in the world is the writer from Joker, Scott Silver. He's probably the biggest writer in Hollywood right
Yeah.
now.
How do you guys know each other?
We probably worked 300 hours together on my script.
Wow. Okay.
And we became, literally, Scott's come to every hearing. He's come to Florida. He's come to Michigan. Everything, this guy would be on the phone with, just say, Brad Pitt, and he'd be like, hey, Rick's calling at 3 o'clock. I have to go. And he would literally hang up because I was calling from prison.
And if he didn't take your call,
I couldn't call back.
You couldn't call back, yeah.
He knew that it was difficult. Literally yesterday he calls and checks on me and offered to do so many things for me. And by the grace of God, I didn't need him to do them when I was released. He offered to pay a year for me to live wherever I wanted to live.
Wow.
And he's just a good person. And what happened was, in the midst of the writing, the director came from another country and they didn't see eye to eye, me and Scott, like what we had done together, and it was more of the truth. And he kept asking Scott to do things that you're a director, you're not a writer. This man's written 8 Mile, The Fighter, Joker. Like, Joker's the first $1 billion rated R movie ever.
Yeah.
So, Scott's very talented and very authentic. So I feel we lost everything, and I kind of disengaged from the movie when Scott was let go. I kind of let go of the movie as well.
So is there a chance that Scott could ever do another movie with the truth?
There's always a chance. We're working on a new documentary right now.
So in which we've been talking about this, about Eminem, being part of playing you
For an episode, yeah.
For an episode. But let's talk about that later. I want to talk about your life story, and we'll get into all the Hollywood stuff later. So you were an FBI informant.
I was.
And you did that to what? Protect your ass and protect your family's ass?
Absolutely not. There was nothing to protect us from. When I got involved with the FBI, I was not a criminal. The FBI kind of took me down the line and taught me to be a criminal. I was a 14-year-old kid.
How did that happen? How did you come into contact with the FBI in the first place? That's the piece I'm missing.
My dad owned a gun store.
Okay.
So when my sister became addicted to drugs, through a local drug dealer in our neighborhood, my dad reached out to some of the people that he thought were his friends. They weren't his friends. They were acquaintances from the gun store. So my dad called them. They came over one day, and I'll never forget it. We had a 2-family flat, which I was just telling Kathy about, and I was listening, as any kid would do.
Sure.
I wasn't dumb, So I was listening to the conversation, and my dad was telling them, I don't know this, I don't know that. And they're like, listen, you asked us for help. We need some help. And all they wanted was some pictures identified. Well, from being in the neighborhood, you pretty much know who everyone was. Like, when I was a drug dealer, you kind of advertise that you're a drug dealer. That's how you do well. So it might be by the car you wear, the clothes you wear, the jewelry you wear. So everybody knew who certain drug dealers were. I had played basketball with them. I played sports with them. So I knew who they were. And it started out just, they already knew who was in these pictures, but they just asked me to identify some pictures. And from there, it kind of grew out of control. When I was shot, my dad basically, the one thing that I heard they got true is he tried to get in a fight with them or basically told them stay the hell away from me at the hospital. And I didn't say anything about who shot me at the time. So what that did in the streets is it gives you more credibility. So now I get out 3 months later, I'm back on my feet. I have a colostomy bag. And they basically sent me out into the big world, gave me a fake ID, sent me to Vegas. And
you had the level of trust with the people they wanted to learn more about.
Absolutely.
That's wild. So
at 14 years old, you think about, I still get nervous about my 18 and 20-year-old daughter going out in the world. And
I have a 16-year-old grandson, and I kind of reflect on my past, and I couldn't imagine him doing 10% of the things that I did.
So these guys, the FBI has got control over you. They're putting you into situations that you'd never put a 14-year-old into.
If you put a child in that same position today, you'd go to prison.
Right.
You would have went to prison back then, but we're talking about the federal government. So.
And they're wanting you to do illegal things, right? They want you to do.
Oh, they had me do illegal things.
Well, tell us some of the things that they had you do.
I would go in houses. I would buy drugs. They would let me keep the drugs. I was taught to buy and sell drugs.
And their goal was they wanted to find what the bigger fish was, or
the goal was corruption. The goal was never really about drug dealers. Johnny Curry was a target, but the target was corruption in the city of Detroit.
And so they kind of have you off doing this stuff, buying drugs, doing drugs. They actually made you.
Why were they letting you keep the drugs?
I couldn't. If you're going to be a drug dealer, you can't just buy drugs.
You got to use them, right?
I didn't use drugs. I sniffed cocaine once in my life.
Okay.
The first time I ever said that on the radio. But I guess some people, you use a drug and you have a love affair with it forever. And my sister happened to be one of those people that when she did it, it grabbed onto her forever. And I also lost an aunt to an overdose. So, there's certain people that can do drugs casually, and there's certain people that have addictive personalities that they might not be able to drink or whatever they do, you become addicted to.
One of the wild things about the 80s, and there's this horrible crack epidemic that led to the war on drugs, and it became a cultural thing where they kind of handled it wrong. Instead of authorities going after the massive wave of drugs coming into the country and who was supplying it and where it was coming from, the origin, they were worried. They seemed to only focus on busting the small-time people in the neighborhoods, not the massive amounts that were being trafficked into this country. And it seems like kids like you were slipping through the cracks there because they were using you to bust local neighborhood guys. And next thing you know, it's only making things worse for your neighborhood or your family and specifically. And they're just using you as a pawn to bust the next guy dealing in the neighborhood.
I just did an interview on the way over here, and we kind of touched on what you just did. The war on drugs was fake. It was targeted towards poor minorities. It was, I don't know how well you've researched the history of drugs, but the Contra hearings and stuff I'm very familiar with, and they knew drugs were coming into this country. To call me a drug kingpin at 17 years old, I'll tell anybody that says that, you're an idiot. There's no nice way to say it. I have a friend that was called a drug kingpin at 16 years old, and today he's a multimillionaire legitimately. So Elon Musk recently put out a quote that said, a drug dealer could run a company better than a college professor. And you have to be an entrepreneur or a hustler, as we call it in the streets, to do what you do and do it on a good level and make money at it. There's a lot of people that try and be drug dealers and they fail. You know what I mean? But the war on drugs was the biggest sham in American history.
I was laughing with my friends this weekend I said, remember we were 12 and the DARE program came in school and we were like innocent 12-year-old suburban kids, didn't know anything about drugs. They taught us all the street names, where to get it, it was like, there was stuff being thrown at me.
Educational
yeah,
course.
I was like, thank you. I didn't even know what any of that stuff was. Jeez, now I'm curious.
But to me, there's some numbers that stick in my head. And since 1999, 500,000 people have died from opioids. They've leveled $27 billion in fines, but not one person's went to prison. So,
and you went to prison for how long?
32 years, 7 months.
Yeah.
But to me, pharmaceutical companies are cartels. A drug kingpin isn't a kid that grew up in poverty and tried to escape poverty by selling drugs. That's not a drug kingpin. Someone that I met in prison, who was Pablo Escobar's main smuggler, was indicted in Michigan in 1988 for 7 tons of cocaine. He received an 11-year sentence. I was a 17-year-old kid, and I received life without parole.
Wow. Rick, I want to go back to the FBI with their thing. You think the FBI was involved in the drugs? Like, was the FBI involved in, or the feds involved in? Was it just a game that they were playing, or what was it?
I know for a fact. I was in prison a long time. I was with huge drug smugglers. I was with people that had ties directly to Pablo Escobar. The guy I was just talking about, Teresa Dominguez. If you read a book, The Accountant by Roberto Escobar, Tito's in that book. And the government knew the drugs were coming in.
Yeah.
There's no doubt in my mind that the government knew the drugs were coming in and they knew where they were going.
So why were they using explain to me what your thoughts are of why you became their pawn to be this. I mean, you would think that out of all people, like, why is it because they figured, okay, this guy will never have the legal means to get out of this, or?
I think I was an uneducated kid. I didn't have strong family ties. I had a single father, that didn't keep good tabs on me. I basically, my grandparents tried the best that they could from across the street to raise me. They were a blue-collar, working-class family. Both of my grandparents worked at Chrysler for 40 years. So, when they depict you in a movie as like white trash, I never saw my dad in a wife beater. You know what I mean? There's a lot of things that...
Your dad was a businessman.
Yeah. My dad put on, dress clothes every day, or a polo and jeans, and he went and did his job, and he worked hard. My dad, we grew up in the gun culture. Yeah. Did my dad sell some guns? Yeah. Never to the silencers that he was convicted of. total bullshit.
Yeah.
They were kits that they sold at the Light Guard Armory on 8 Mile Road that anybody could walk in and buy legally for $40. And some dirty cops dropped the cylinders in the tube and said that they were operable, and they weren't.
Wow.
But you can't, during your trial, you can't say, oh, can we see if this works? It doesn't work that way. People believe what the police say.